my groceries, pantry, you know, everything that's hot.
In the last few weeks, we've just seen a dramatic increase, 30 to 40% in the pantries, 30 to 40% in the food fairs. There are so many people who need food. Prices are high, checks are not coming. You know, there's a lot of uncertainty. And so we're just striving to meet the need.
If you have heard that SNAP is back after the government reopened, but you still do not see full November funds on your EBT card, the most important question is not what is happening in Washington, but when your state will actually pay. It is the same SNAP program and the same month of November, yet the moment when benefits really hit the card has been very different from state to state, and that has left tens of millions of recipients waiting and worrying. After 43 days of a federal government shutdown, the House and Senate finally passed a spending bill, and the President signed it, reopening the government and allowing the Department of Agriculture and its Food and Nutrition Service to resume funding SNAP. According to Newsweek, the Department of Agriculture told the magazine that most states would receive the money needed to pay benefits within 24 hours of the government reopening. However, when the funds show up on individual EBT cards still depends on each state's own systems and processing calendar. In a piece asking directly, when can SNAP recipients expect to get paid now that the government has reopened, Time magazine also cited the Department of Agriculture and the Food Research and Action Center, noting that federal funds can technically reach state treasuries within about a day, but converting that into actual deposits on EBT cards can take several days to a week. Why is there such a big gap between the promise of within 24 hours and the reality that many families waited close to 2 weeks for full benefits? The answer lies in how differently states paid SNAP during the shutdown and in early November. In a series of memos issued between October 10th and November 7th, the Food and Nutrition Service explained that because of limited funding, the federal government could only guarantee about 65% of November benefit costs. Guidance released on November 4th stressed that the 35% cut would apply only to November 2025 and would not affect previous months. From that point, states effectively split into 3 groups. Some states did not pay any November benefits while the government was shut down. Others paid a reduced benefit equal to roughly 2/3 of the maximum. A handful of states used a brief legal window to pay full benefits to some recipients before they were told to stop. Before the government reopened, AP News and WHYY described 2 main scenarios. States that had not paid any November benefits, such as South Carolina and West Virginia, were expected to be the quickest to catch up once federal funds were released, because they did not have to calculate and load a second supplemental payment. By contrast, 16 states that had already loaded reduced benefits, equal to about 65% of the maximum, would need to run an extra round of technical work to top up the missing 35%. The American Public Human Services Association, cited by AP News, said most states would be able to make up the difference within 3 days of receiving the green light, but some might need up to a week. To answer the concrete question, which state pays when, Axios compiled a detailed state-by-state list updated on November 14th. The article noted that after the president signed the bill reopening the government, the Department of Agriculture said money had begun flowing to states. However, the time when people saw full November SNAP deposits on their EBT cards still varied widely. Axios divided states into 3 groups. The first included states that had already paid full benefits before or shortly after the government reopened, such as Alaska, California, New York, Massachusetts, Pennsylvania, and Washington. Some of these states, including New York, Delaware, Rhode Island, Virginia, and Maryland, had even used state funds to pay SNAP benefits while the federal government was still shut down. The second group covered states with a clear timeline for loading the rest of November benefits, including Alabama, Arkansas, Colorado, Georgia, North Carolina, and Tennessee. The third group covered states that had not announced a specific date at the time Axios published, among them Arizona, Florida, Texas, and Wyoming. North Carolina is one of the clearest examples of this two-step pattern. In a press release on November 13th, the North Carolina Department of Health and Human Services announced that after Congress and the President agreed to reopen the government, the agency would load full November SNAP benefits onto EBT cards for around 600,000 households on the following Friday. The release recalled that on November 7th, North Carolina had already loaded reduced benefits, equal to about 65% of the maximum, for more than 586,000 households based on the original USDA guidance. Because of the benefit formula, some households received nothing at all in that first round. Once new guidance arrived after the government reopened, the state moved quickly to issue the remaining portion for nearly 1.4 million people who rely on SNAP. For recipients in North Carolina, this meant their EBT balances changed twice in November, once for a reduced amount early in the month and a second time for the supplemental payment needed to reach the full benefit. Tennessee offers another example of a delayed full payment. On October 24th, before the budget impasse was resolved, the governor's office warned SNAP customers that November benefits would not be sent until the federal shutdown ended, urging people to plan ahead and stretch whatever balance remained on their cards. After Congress passed the spending bill and the Department of Agriculture updated its guidance, the Tennessee Department of Human Services announced on November 17th that it had received instructions from the Food and Nutrition Service to begin issuing full November SNAP benefits. The department reassured recipients that all missing benefit amounts would be loaded and that the December payment schedule would return to normal. In practice, that meant many Tennessee families did not see full November benefits until the third week of the month, even though the program had access to federal funding soon after the government reopened. The lag is also visible in Texas. The Texas Health and Human Services Commission explained on its information page about the federal shutdown that SNAP had been affected while the government was closed, and that once the shutdown was resolved, the agency resumed issuing full benefits. The Texas Tribune reported that SNAP recipients in Texas started receiving full November SNAP benefits on Friday, November 14th, after 2 weeks of uncertainty over food assistance. During that time, many families had to rely on food banks and charities to fill the gap. In other words, for Texans, the key date for full November benefits was the middle of the month, not immediately after the spending bill was signed.
Illinois and West Virginia add 2 more perspectives on the timing gap between states. CBS Chicago reported that Illinois began sending out full November SNAP payments on Friday, November 14th, after the shutdown ended and the Department of Agriculture released the necessary funds. Before that, households in Illinois had either received nothing or only a reduced benefit, putting significant pressure on local food banks. State officials told the station they aimed to complete full November payments for all households by November 20th, a timeline Illinois also shared with Axios for the national state-by-state list. In West Virginia, according to West Virginia Watch, SNAP recipients finally received their full November benefits on a Thursday or Friday after nearly 2 weeks of delay following the lapse of the program on November 1st. That outcome confirmed an earlier AP News projection that states which had sent no November benefits during the shutdown would likely be quickest to catch up once funding arrived. Nationally, AP News described how states scrambled to send full SNAP benefits to millions of people after the government shutdown ends. In a story republished by ABC News and PBS, AP reported that the Department of Agriculture had told states on October 24th it would not fund SNAP for November if the shutdown continued. That warning pushed many states, especially those led by Democrats, either to sue the federal government or to advance state money to keep benefits flowing. Once the shutdown ended, states that had sent no November benefits were expected to pay within roughly 24 to 72 hours. States that had already loaded the reduced 65% benefit faced a more complex technical task. They had to calculate the supplemental amounts, transmit additional payment files, and deal with any system issues that arise when a single month suddenly has 2 large benefit loads. From the recipient's perspective, all of these legal and technical details boil down to one very concrete issue. When will the EBT card be loaded? The major news outlets point to a common pattern. First, most states began loading full November benefits within roughly 1 to 7 days after the government reopened and the spending bill was signed. depending on whether the state was in the no benefits yet group or the partial benefits already paid group. Second, in states that had already loaded reduced 65% benefit at the maximum under early November guidance, such as North Carolina and Tennessee, recipients saw a second deposit in the middle of the month instead of a single full payment on one date. Third, some large states like Texas and Illinois took close to 2 weeks from the start of November and several days from the formal end of the shutdown to complete full November payments because they had to wait for federal funds and run an extra round of processing. One final point SNAP recipients need to keep in mind is that even though the federal administration, as Politico reported, pledged to issue full benefits within 24 hours of the shutdown's end, the actual payment calendar is always set at the state level. The Department of Agriculture can move money to states quickly, but only the SNAP agency in each state decides the exact day funds are loaded onto cards. For beneficiaries, the most practical step is to monitor official announcements from the state agency that manages SNAP, and to compare those notices with the broader national picture outlined by outlets such as Axios, AP News, Newsweek, and Time. The November episode makes one thing clear. When federal funding stalls, the date your EBT card is reloaded is no longer a fixed point on the calendar, but can differ by as much as a full week from one state to another. And that timing difference can determine whether a family has enough food on the table in the first days of the month.